It's also necessary to reflect that not all costs of a licensing authority are recoverable. Charity street collections and charity house-to-house collections are an example where a fee is not permitted to be charged. So in those cases, obviously, we couldn't, we just simply cannot recover 100% of our operational budget because we do spend a degree of our time dealing with that type of application. And also, because we have this two-tier system almost of where we have discretionary fees and we've got statutory fees, if the income in the statutory side is not covering the costs of that side of things, we cannot put the discretionary fees up to cover a shortfall in the statutory side. So that's another example of where, you know, if we are making a loss in that area, we have to carry that loss. And both of those losses as such, if you were looking at it in a business context, would be carried and paid for by the council's general fund. Okay, in that way. So as I say, as a point's raised, it's not legally possible to recover 100%, and we are required by law to review the fees annually. Now, we don't have to change them, but we have to review them. Essentially, you know, there are ebbs and flows in licensing work. You know, some years we'll have more applicants in a certain area, more enforcement work or policy work. So there is a bit of an ebb and flow over time. So just because we make a surplus, a small surplus in year one, doesn't mean that we've got to have a knee-jerk reaction and put those fees down. But if we continue to make surpluses, or as is highlighted in this report, we're on course to make a significant surplus, then steps should be taken to remedy that rather than waiting 2 or 3 years. Okay. So we consider the direct costs such as licensing staff wages and pensions, indirect costs that can be attributed to the licensing procedures. So that can be things like office accommodation costs, ICT support and software licensing fees, because we obviously have to pay to access Microsoft and our databases that we use. We can also recover things like travel, so when we have to pay to travel out to do an inspection on a dog breeder or an animal boarding establishment, for instance. Legal support costs, obviously there are costs where we do require legal support from time to time. Advertising, for instance, the next item on today's agenda, the taxi fares had to be advertised in accordance with the legislation, so those costs can also be recovered. Equipment, postage, printing, subscriptions, telephone costs, training. In that way, we're very much like a business. We have all these overheads as such that we do incur in addition to just the wage of the person sat at the desk. In relation to in the consideration of applications, it's reasonable to recover the costs of running relevant committees as well. So those figures are all taken into account. Now, in paragraph 4.3, table 1 shows the cost of running the authority and the income received for the 3 years ending March 2025. So you'll see there that 22-23 we recovered 68%, 23-24 77%, and then 24-25 we recovered 77% still, but the figures were greater because the income and expenditure figures were higher, but we still managed to recover 77% of the operational budget. Now, I talk about the operational budget because those members who may sit on other committees where you'll see licensing's income and expenditure come up may see things, you know, where you've got an underspend, etc. This is because of the fact that the licensing budget is a separate element which looks at the day-to-day costs, and then there is a corporate on charges, which is a separate sort of figure, a separate sum that takes into account all of those additional departmental support costs, so things like IT support, customer service support, legal support, facilities support, all of those are in the corporate costs. And because we are a cost centre, what we're trying to do is recover as much as possible of both the day-to-day LI001 budget and the corporate on costs. And as I say, we've historically We've looked to try and recover around 80% because that's what the figures were suggesting we should be looking to recover. So 77% was actually quite good in that way. And as I say, we're never going to recover 100% because if we do, I'm not doing my job right because it means that we're acting unlawfully. Okay. Now, quite a wholesale change to licensing happened on the 1st of April 2025. Members will have heard me talk about this at previous meetings, but we had a large specialist private hire company approach the council to begin migrating their drivers and vehicles to us to be their national licensing authority effectively. And that has, as I say, that has profoundly changed the whole remit of licensing. And what I'm going to do in the next sort of few minutes is just sort of go through some of how that's changed. So, as I say, this was dealt with in very much like a project as a standalone project. It has altered the financial and operational activities profoundly. By way of an example, we have increased our staff count from 4 that we had prior to the 1st of April. As of the 12th of January, because one of the recruited people is still on notice at their existing employer. But from the 12th of January, we'll have 11. So it's an increase from 4 to 11 in 8 months. So it's a significant expansion has happened. And obviously what comes with that is a degree of upfront costs of essentially we've had to move offices to bigger offices. We've had to buy in a lot more IT furniture and IT equipment, training time, and all of these different sort of systems costs that we've incurred. 4.5, I stipulate in that first 6 months of the migration project has seen almost 2,700 applications processed over and above the department's normal work levels. That's purely from this national operator. It's not had any impact on service parameters for the rest of our existing trade areas. The people doing this work have been largely just doing the national operator's work. Over the next 6 months, the project will move into the second phase, which will see both the processing of new and migrating drivers and vehicles and the renewal of those who already hold licenses. And as a result of that, it's very likely that additional staff will be recruited before the year end to assist with that next phase, which will further impact, obviously, on income and expenditure ratios. It's very much at the moment trying to plan on what we believe is going to happen from open communication that we have with the national operators and obviously with our existing trade who are also expanding as well at this point in time. But I wouldn't be able to tell members today how many staff will be required by that point in time. All I can say to members is that every decision we make to expand is well and truly thought out and thought through to ensure that we obviously have a balance with resource against need in that way. So table 2 on page 14 illustrates the impact that this migration project has had on the department's figures. So you'll see in here the different areas of Licensing Act, animal premises, etc. The 24-25 numbers of applications and the percentage of overall sort of time spent in those areas. And then from April moving forward, where we expect to be for this period that we're in currently. So you can see that whereas most areas have remained pretty static, we are maintaining license numbers in just about all areas. But you can obviously see where the driver and vehicle areas are where the biggest growth has happened. And then again, because of the way ratios and percentages work, as soon as you have an influx in one area, it will obviously change where the figures sit. So an example of our Licensing Act in 24-25 was roughly 22% of our time. It's now 7.83% of our time, but that's 7.83% of a much larger budget as well, and a much larger resource. So that's what we're dealing with at the moment, and it is very much a moving beast that we and myself obviously are trying to keep on top of, to ensure that we do things right, I suppose, in that way. So what does this mean? Well, it's estimated that if the current taxi fees, which are equivalent to £180 a year for a taxi driver licence and £250 a year for a taxi vehicle licence, are not reduced, taxi income for the 25-26 period will exceed true costs of taxi licensing by around £400,000 to £500,000, which, as I've pointed out already, is not permitted. This level of surplus would leave the council open to challenge. So, conclusion. Due to the significant changes to the establishment income and expenditure being experienced, officers recommend leaving all discretionary fees at their current levels, with the exception of taxi licensing fees for drivers and vehicle applicants. Now, whilst we were holding pre-migration meetings with this national operator, the subject of fee levels was raised, and indicative application fee levels based on the level of work promised and the estimated costs at that time were discussed. These predictions and assurances are on course to be met and actually probably more than likely exceeded as I sit here. Now, officers recommend that the following fees in Table 3 should be charged for taxi application. It's further recommended that these reduced fees should be brought in immediately and adjustments be made to licences issued from the 1st of April 2025. These proposed fees are in line with the indicative fees discussed earlier in the year. The nominal differences between the different types of driver and vehicle licences shown in the table reflect the differing licensing processing costs, maintenance costs and third-party costs that are associated with that type of licensing. So, for instance, with Hackney carriage vehicles, there are costs that we incur for maintaining the ranks. So, from time to time, the rank lining and signage is updated. Fare setting, as I say, the next item today is a taxi fares increase. Now, there are associated costs with that which are not applicable to anyone who's in private hire work. So that is a specific cost that is attributed to Hackney proprietors. So there's a small amount of additional fee level just to cover that. Also, the plates and media that we purchase for the taxis as well. Some types of our vehicles don't require a badge to be displayed, and others do, and there is a direct cost of purchasing that material and that media. So it's there are say a few minor differences between the standard private hire, the restricted private hire, and Hackney carriage trade, but they are very minor levels, and they just, as I say, reflect those additional processing and procedural differences between the different types. Now, whilst the vehicle fees proposed in the table are lower than the current vehicle fees, Section 70 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976 does not permit vehicle fees to be varied up or down without a 28-day consultation period taking place. So if members approve the recommendation, officers will conduct a necessary consultation, and if objections are received, these will be heard at a future licensing committee hearing in that way. Now, financial implications of this report item. If members were to approve the proposals, taxi licence holders and applicants would see reductions in the level of fees they will incur for their driver and vehicle licences. If the proposals to reduce the fees and backdate the reduction to the 1st of April were not to be approved, a significant underspend against income would occur, which, as I say, would be challengeable. Officer time has been obviously required to prepare this report, but as I've already stated during this report, those fees are all, and costs, should I say, are all covered by the fees that we are charging. As I say, we must determine the review at this point. Failure to do so, again, would leave the council liable to to legal challenge, should I say. We must observe the consultation requirements regarding taxi vehicle changes, and if we fail to do that, we could be open to legal challenge. And as I've already stated right at the beginning, we must only ensure that true costs of taxi licensing are recovered. Otherwise, we would again be open to legal challenge on that. That's my report, Chair. I'm obviously available for questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Does anybody have any questions for Stuart? Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stuart. A very extensive and well-written report. I'm fairly new to this committee, so I'm going to ask a question of understanding, and apologies for not asking it before the meeting, but I think it might be something that somebody else is struggling with as well. If I look at Table 1, I see an 18% year-on-year growth in expenditure from 326k to 326k, and yet I think you were reported a 300% almost rise in staff. I'm just looking for the correlation there. We can go up 18% in what I'm deeming to be the activity related, but go from 4 to 11 staff for that work. I'm obviously missing something, so apologies, but...
That's fine. That's what we're here to do, to explain things and hopefully, you know, enlighten everybody. Effectively, in near on 11 years that I've worked with this authority, for the vast majority of that time, licensing was a static service you know, we had a churn of maintenance of licenses, and there was you know, limited growth. We went through COVID, we went through all these times where there was a bit of a constriction, people move away from licensing, etc. So the staffing level was relatively sort of stagnant as such. But obviously the world gets more expensive, so the expenditure level increased through that time because of wages, pensions, on costs and all those sorts of things. But the main difference and the reason why we've grown from 4 to 11 is because of the fact that each of these licenses that we deal with, so these taxi licenses, we have, again, I think as I checked this morning, we're nearly 2,000 issued, and the income from that, obviously, to process 2,000 taxi licenses, which are, you know, that's 2,000 drivers, 2,000 vehicles. To process those, each driver takes approximately an hour and a quarter to an hour and a half just to process and go through all the checking and vetting that we have to go through. So, you know, one person can do, you know, approximately 3 to 4 of those a day. Now, we're receiving around 100 plus a week. So in order to process that many applications, we need these additional bums on seats as such. And obviously therefore, when we get to the end of this period, the income level will be significantly higher than the 386, but the operational costs will be significantly higher too. But they will still be proportionate to how they used to be with the level of work we had in the past. So I'm not sure, hopefully that's answered.
I apologise. So what we're actually saying here is that the decision to take on national contracts is a fundamental reason why we've got a rise in our work, which is resulting in a reduction in our costs per delivery.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, just for points of clarification, we didn't go out and sort of covet and look for this work. This national operator started to push one of their regions to us in 2022. So in October 22, we received the first of their applications, but it was only for one of their 58 areas. Now, over the sort of 2 years, first 2 years of being with us, because we were processing their applications way quicker than the national average at licensing authorities, they obviously saw a benefit in getting their licenses through ourselves. So they had the office here, they've got the vehicles, they've got the drivers, and they had these special education needs contracts that were already in place. They were just being licensed to fulfill those contracts by a different authority. But because that authority was not turning around their renewals and their applications as quick as we were turning them around, they approached us to see whether we would be able to grow sufficiently to deal with their extensive fleet, which is in the region of 5,000 drivers and 5,000 vehicles. Now, obviously, we had discussions, and the decision was made to say that yes, we would be able to grow if they chose to come to us, and they made the business decision to use us as their national licensing authority. But anyone's free to do that. Any of our existing operators could go to another authority if they wish to sort of license elsewhere. What we pride ourselves on here is being reasonable, being good at what we do, being effective and reasonably quick. So those attributes as such, meant that we have, yes, secured this business to come to us. Historically, we only had about, any given time, if you took a snapshot of our database, you would have had around about 186 vehicles and around probably 200 drivers. And that was fairly consistent for a number of years. Now, on those levels of licenses, you don't get any economies of scale. You just don't. When you're looking at, like we are so far, where we're issuing well over 400 drivers and vehicles every month that are migrating from other licensing authorities to ourselves, it's clear that you do get economies of scale, and that's what we're finding. And so even with the larger costs that we're incurring, if we were not to reduce the fees which were set to recover the costs of that much smaller scale, then, as I said in my report, we are kind of on course to sort of be having a surplus of near on £500,000, which is not permitted. So, as I say, the benefit, and this was discussed right at the very start, was that, in a world which is getting ever expensive, and I'm not under any illusion that our licensing fees are an insignificant part of what an operator has to cover, with vehicle costs going up and all these other things going up. But what this has enabled us to do, if members are agreeing to it today, is obviously lower the fees that our existing trade have had to pay by quite significant sums, which for a larger operator in our area is likely to have a fairly significant impact. But even for our single operators, if they're going to be saving, a couple of £100 a year, then that's, I'm sure, will be quite agreeable to them. And that's been possible because of the efficiencies and the economies of scale that this project has brought to the district.
Question, sorry, it's becoming clear, the fog's almost gone. But my last question, and again, it's probably one I should know, but again, it'd be useful to air. So if we are licensing 5,000 taxis for a national company, and 20 of those are operating in Ipswich, I don't know why I chose Ipswich, but Ipswich, right? Are they working to our licensing fees and our taxi costs? You see where I'm coming from? I'm just trying to understand, because occasionally I'll get a taxi from Ely to get home, and occasionally I'll get a taxi from Newmarket to get home. Depends on the train that I've taken to come home, and they're different costs.
Yeah. So the cost of a consumer is different to the costs of the license. The cost of a consumer is the next item we'll be talking about. Okay. If we're talking about Hackney carriages that you're jumping into. Now, if you're jumping into a private hire vehicle charges to the consumer are set by the operator. It could be any operator out there who's licensed. I won't mention names, but they will have their tariff of charges, and they're not governed by the taxi charges that we'll be discussing on the next item. Okay, because Hackney carriages are governed by the council, but private hire charges to the consumer per mile or per journey are set by the operator. Now, what we're talking about on this item is the fees that an operator has to pay to a local authority in order to apply for the licenses they require.
They're not directly attributable to the cost that the punter will be paying for that Hackney
No,
fare.
you could always obviously infer or argue that if they're having to, if an operator is having to pay a council £1,000 a year to get a driver and a vehicle licensed, then their operational costs, if they've got a fleet of 50, is going to be higher. Therefore, they would need to charge more per mile, per journey to get back compared to somewhere charging £250. It is a business cost to the operator who's providing that service, but it is not something that affects where they operate. So any private hire operator can now take a booking and fulfill that booking, even if the start and end of that journey are outside of our district. So you could take a job with one of our local licensed operators and say, I need to be picked up from Newmarket station, train station, and taken to, I don't know, Cambridge. And our operator would be able to fulfill that booking, providing it's fulfilled with our driver and our vehicle. Okay. Now there is a slight exemption to that. They can also subcontract that booking you make, so they can subcontract it to another operator. That used to be somebody within our area, but since 2015 that can be an operator based anywhere. So they could say, I will take your booking, but I can't fulfill it. Somebody's ill, sick, whatever it may be, but I will notify you and I will subcontract the booking to an operator licensed with Cambridge City, for instance, and it will be a Cambridge City driver and vehicle that comes and picks you up and takes you. Now, there is nothing wrong with doing that, but you will be charged the fee which you agree with the first operator, and the second operator has to abide by those rules. So it's quite complex, but this particular national operator doesn't do any of that sort of work at all. They purely transport children and vulnerable adults to schools and colleges via publicly funded contracts which are awarded through various sort of bodies, but mainly county councils and unitary authorities around the country. They don't take people to the train station. They don't take people to to the supermarket or that sort of thing. So they are very much a niche company. There has been minimal impact on businesses in our area because of the fact that the vast majority so far, they already hold the contracts that they've got these drivers for. All they're doing is moving their driver who is currently licensed, say, with Milton Keynes or Bedford or as far as Manchester, and they are licensing them with us. And then that driver and vehicle, which are identified with our markings, are then operating in those areas. And if they are found to be doing anything wrong, then the enforcement officers in those areas will report that back to us because they have a legal duty to do so, and we will take action against them. And we are seeing very small levels of that type of thing being reported back. But in fairness, most of it is a confusion as to what they're permitted to do and what they're not, which we're clearing up for them.
Thank you. Councillor Trapp, you were next, and then you, Mark.
I may actually, my battery is running out and I didn't get a paper copy, so I may have a problem. First of all, for Councillor Goldsack's thing, the table 1 actually only shows things till the April 2025, so it hasn't actually shown, it hasn't included any of the sudden surge. Yeah, but looking at that table, one says there's 77% recovered. Now, if we're going to go up and double or treble, 77% recoverable is going to means there's going to be even more costs to the council. But I suppose the fees that you got, it will be more or less neutral as to how much we'll recover from the send people.
Yeah, so those figures were based on all the parameters at play at that point in time. Projections, if they continue the way they are looking to have done in the first 6 months, is that we will probably be recovering close to 97% of our operational budget by the year end. The problem is, as you rightly point out, those figures are ones until April 25, and at this point in time, we haven't really got set figures to go on because everything's just changing all the time, you know, because I'll have a weekly meeting with finance and explain to them that we've got another new starter. So then we obviously have to look at the costing code amount, and that changes the budget, which then changes everything. So that's part of the reason why in the conclusion I've suggested that because all the other areas of licensing, the numbers have remained static, and indications are showing that those areas are at cost recovery. That is the reason why my recommendation is to leave them alone, you know, and keep them as they are at this point in time, so that when we get to the full year of trading, the full first year of trading with this new project, we will be able to report back and look at things, you know, far better this time next year.
Thank you. I have other questions as well, obviously. Is it going to be constant? I mean, this company, will it be more or less the same for the next, well, it's only another 2.5 years we need to do, isn't it? Because of LGR.
Yeah.
So will we be, it's huge numbers, but will they be more or less the same? Will you know, so there won't be fluctuations. Suddenly one year it'll go down to 2,000 instead of 4,000.
It is something we have, putting it bluntly, we have zero control over, Councillor. You know, it is a company like any other. They have to tender and bid for contracts the same as any other operator in the country. And sometimes they may, you know, obviously secure those contracts, and then sometimes they may miss out on those contracts. But they are an established company that has been around for many, many, many years. To that extent, I do not see the levels dropping off. What I see, and I alluded to in the report, is that I looked at this project as being in phases. Phase 1 was the onboarding of migratory applications from other authorities coming to us, setting up the stall, so to speak, of the numbers that we would obviously then have to at some point renew. And so phase 2 will commence in earnest from April 2026, when arguably March, because they'll be applying a month before, but all of those which started to be applied for in April 25 will need to be renewed in April 26 because they are only been issued 1-year licenses. So in April 2026 we will be renewing, I think, vast majority of the ones we issued this year, but we will still only be probably halfway through the migration of their existing drivers from around the country to us. So phase 2 is going to see work levels potentially go up by 50, 60, 70%. Eventually, we will have migrated everybody over, and then we will be in the kind of third phase, which is the general maintenance phase, and the levels of staffing, the level of resourcing, and all those will be static. And yes, you rightly point out that obviously on the horizon we do have LGR, but the operator is aware of that, our existing trader are aware of that, as our officers, and you know, the bottom line is they will still need to be licensed. They will just be licensed by a different, larger authority. Exactly.
Maybe somewhere else.
Yeah, you know,
Okay.
and again, you know, sorry, one final point, Councillor, I was going to say was, you know, any authority, if suddenly we didn't provide a service that that I pride myself on, which is quick turnaround and good standards, then clearly they may choose to go elsewhere, but we're not going to let that happen.
Thank you very much. The next question, on table 3, I noticed 1 or 2 renewals don't require a new DBS check. The renewal application for joint hackney. Why is that? I mean, or is that missing? I would have thought one had to have a DBS check.
Yeah. My apologies, I probably could have made it clearer. It's just purely that once they're up and running, all of our licence holders have to be on the DBS update service which is, I think the current fee is £16, which they pay to maintain that. And what it means is it makes their static document that would expire effectively after 3 months, it keeps it live. And what they do is when they apply to us, they sign a consent form to say they consent to us checking the update service, and then we check it every 4 months. So what will happen is if we issued a license today, that DBS will have an expiry in 6 months, okay? But after 4 months, we go on to the update service and we check to make sure that the certificate still remains current and nothing has changed. And as long as we get the right result back on that update service, then we throw forward the expiry for a further 6 months. But the reason we do a check after 4 months is because obviously if they have fallen off it, that can happen because their credit card's expired, for instance. Then it gives them 2 months to apply for a new DBS so they don't end up getting suspended and have to be off the road. So we have safeguards in place for that.
And the work involved is obviously included in the fee.
Indeed, yeah. So as I say, every single driver license that we issue will have 3 DBS checks on the update service every year, and that's about half an hour of officer time per driver just to do the DBS update check. So obviously with 3, 4, 5,000 drivers, you can see there's a significant amount of time is taken doing that check, but it's a vital check because obviously, if somebody has committed a crime, then we need to make sure that they're not potentially putting the public at risk.
Well done. Poor Mark will have forgotten. Councillor Inskip.
Yeah, I'm still recovering from a revelation that Councillor Trapp is battery powered.
Yes, I thought he'd have had a solar panel.
Yes. Yeah, it's not going to work well today, is it? So I think I had a couple of questions. I think the first one has been addressed, but I'll just check it again. And that is, obviously, if our percentage recovery remains the same, but the overall cost goes up, clearly the cost that falls on the authority is higher. But I think you're saying that that isn't going to be the case, and that effectively the recovery goes up. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So as I say, I had to try and draw a line of how it used to be for members who have been on this panel for a number of years, with what it's like from the 1st of April, without the full figures available for what we are and where we are. But effectively, all of the costs of taxi licensing is 100% recoverable, but the overall cost of the licensing authority is not, because we can't recover for charity. So that 77% figure, please do not be concerned by that. It won't be 77% of a much larger figure and therefore a burden on the council. We are looking at it probably being in the region of about, it could be as much as 98% recovered, maybe slightly more. Like the figures at the moment are showing that only around 1.5% would be attributed to licensing types that we can't charge for. So no, the costs of this whole project and the whole taxi side will always be recoverable. Yes, so please ignore the 77% for the future. It is, let's say, more than likely going to be high 90s.
Okay, and my second question is to understand, so obviously you're taking on a lot more staff to handle all the extra work, what is the risk that in 2 or 3 years' time that this major operator decides, actually, I don't like East Cams anymore, I'll go somewhere else. And it's just Councillor Trapp said it's a problem for 2 or 3 years. I don't think it really is, because ultimately, when whatever option happens with unitaries, there'll be a unitary authority, staff will be tupied over, there will undoubtedly be some risk through the economies of scale of combining licensing departments. If we also then lose a major tranche of work, that makes that situation worse. So maybe it's not a problem for this authority, maybe it's a shadow authority or beyond, but I just want to understand what the risk is there.
I think as I've sort of said, there is a risk. There is a risk that with, even in animal licensing, there's a risk that people will just cease doing it because, we all know when COVID hit that there was a massive demand on puppies. And obviously, you know, a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon. There were people breeding who had never bred before because they could charge £3,000–4,000 for a puppy, and we saw a massive increase in the numbers of licenses. Now those licenses have started to drop off. And this is what you're always up against in licensing, is that we don't have a legal power to say to somebody, you can't come to us. You know, so we may, if, as I sort of alluded to, if we became, you know, very slow at what we do, very poor at what we do, brought in unreasonable requests of people, you know, that just can't be justified, then clearly an operator may choose to go elsewhere. You know, this particular operator has chosen to move from elsewhere to come to us because we're good at what we do. Now, it's not, you know, being, you know, horrible to those out there. They'll have their own issues and constraints which they work to. But as I say, we have very good standards here. We have very good staff. We have very good turnaround times. You know, and that is appealing to people. And so, you know, from that point of view, is there a risk? Yes, there is. There is always a risk. I can't say there wouldn't be. But those risks were taken into account. And ultimately, as I say, it isn't a piece of legislation where you can actually say to people, I'm not going to issue this to you. You know, and we're not alone in authorities seeing large increases like this. There's a number of authorities I'm aware of who are suffering with, I suppose I've coined the phrase the Uber effect, but it's where Uber or Bolt or one of these big online companies has got an operating license, that people are migrating towards those authorities in order to be able to get onto those platforms. So it's an ever-changing you know, environment that we're working in. But all of these risks were outlined when we had those initial meetings and discussions. And I suppose that ultimately it's for us to prove our part in this as much as the operator proving that they were going to, you know, do what they said, which is to move them across to us. And ultimately, as I say, if we do, when we obviously go to the new unitary setup, they will still need to be licensed, and those people will be tupied over in that way.
Done. Christine Ambrose-Smith.
Thank you. I think probably you've almost covered a couple of things that I'm wondering about. Word of our efficiency will obviously spread throughout the taxi and hire community. There may be other niche organisations. Are you aware of any? Have there been any first steps of approach, you know, that we might again substantially sort of hit?
Yeah, we have had a number of tentative approaches. I believe one of the off-putting factors is that the restricted license, which is the one that some of these operators have been looking to take on, has a restriction that they have to PAYE employ the drivers and license the vehicles themselves. Now, that's not a general model that the licensing trade use. The vast majority, you know, some will employ their drivers, but others will use self-employed, subcontracted drivers, so they don't have that employer relationship with them. So, you know, that is a restriction that we put in, you know, to try and stifle that, because we are aware that there is another there's another licensing authority out there that is well known in the trade, that as a result of COVID and the lockdowns and word of mouth, you know, went from being a little bit bigger than an East Cams fleet size, but not significantly more than what we had, and they now license around 18% of the UK's private hire and hackney trade. Some 60-odd thousand drivers and vehicles, and their staff count has now, I think, hit around 150. So, you know, this is the thing. It is highly possible that you know, that we could get another national operator come to us. But if that happened, then we'd get bigger offices, we'd get more staff, and we'd do what we do every day and just make sure that they and our existing trade get the service they need.
As a follow-up to that, have you experienced difficulty in recruiting appropriate staff? I mean, do you have someone with no licensing experience come to you and you are able to train them up within, say, 2 or 3 months? Or
Yeah, so we've been incredibly fortunate. The vast majority of people that we've recruited so far have been at a low level, what we call an entry level, administrative level. They have received full training from my existing staff, and they came in with various transferable skills, but no licensing knowledge at that point in time. And we've got those individuals trained up, and they are fantastic. They're really doing a great job. One of the other areas, we recruited somebody from another part of the authority that had the relevant qualifications that we needed, and they came in and they're doing fantastic work as well. And then we've now got to the point where there was sufficient demand and need on resource to get a senior officer. And that senior officer is coming in with over 10 years of licensing experience. They are in that role already at another authority, and they're coming to us, and they commence on the 12th of January. So we've got a fantastic team that, in the first place, and then the new additions have been fantastic. The morale in the team is great. And I'm incredibly pleased with where we are. And just again, by way of an example, when we advertised the first round back in February, I think it was, we had over 45 applicants, which we had to sort of get down to 4 at that time. And the second round, we didn't advertise as widely, and we still got almost the same. So. No, we've been very fortunate in that way.
that's very reassuring. It obviously points to the fact that you're running a very good operation. Lastly, the question, if a taxi driver or whatever in somewhere like Manchester is convicted of a crime or accused of a crime, and as a hearing is required to determine his fate, shall we say, or her fate, would that be dealt with by colleagues in an appropriate area, or would it be dealt with here, in which case might someone have to travel down the length of the country to present their arguments and things?
Yeah, we are the licensing authority. The operator who came to us is aware that as we are the licensing authority, that the committee will be heard here, and those drivers who are a number of hours away from where we are located would be required to attend that hearing. Obviously, if they choose not to, the hearing can be held in their absence, and they can just provide written evidence. But no, it doesn't have an impact on where they are, and the operator's aware of that, and as I say, they are the employer as well. So they know that they will ensure that that individual is sat before the committee. So just the same as if they lived in Soham or Littleport.
That throws up a question. Would we, from a member perspective, be able to deal with the number of hearings? Tough, I expect, but...
Yeah. It's a valid question, and again, it's something that we have looked into. The issue is that you can have a small number of drivers and vehicles, or a small number of licence holders in liquor licence, because committees deal with those as well. And you can have a small number and terrible compliance levels and end up in committee after committee. And I've worked at authorities where, some weeks we would have 6 or 7 committees, dealing with new applications or dealing with reviews of applications. It's not just taxi drivers who are affected by that. And on the other end of the scale, you can have a large number of licenses in force, very, very good standards of compliance and never have, you know, any issues. Now, as I say, you know, we have had cause to convene taxi committees in here and licensing act committees, etc., over the time I've worked here. But has there been a significant increase in those numbers because of this national operator coming to us? No. You know, they are incredibly compliant. They have their own compliance teams. As I say, yes, we are getting occasional, you know, reports coming in, but they at this point in time, they are nothing more than generally inquiries wondering, like, again, our vehicles, for that particular type of license, they have to have an internal plate, but not an external plate, and they don't have door stickers. Now, that's quite confusing in some areas of the country because, you know, some Hackney carriages obviously have stickers and private hire vehicles will have door stickers and plates. So ours are more incognito than others, or where they have all got the QR code on them so people can see live information. And most of my inquiries to date have been from enforcing officers who are just asking for a bit more information than what we've already provided them.
Thank you.
Councillor Colbert.
No, it's okay, thanks very much. What
Sure.
I was going to bring up something, Alfred. Thank you.
I seem to have Councillor Trapp again. Were you waving?
Yes.
Come back to you, because Councillor Horgan has got a question. Okay. Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, actually. Second one with my business head on. In your conclusion in section 5.3, you mentioned that if approved, it will be backdated to the 1st of April this year, which obviously would mean that we could be paying back people who have already paid us money. Would that be in the form of a credit note or a refund?
We would look and see what the sums of money were. I would imagine with a larger operator, we would raise a refund. With some of the smaller operators and individual license holders, then we would give the option of either a refund to be raised or the equivalent as a credit towards their next renewal. Obviously further reducing the cost of the subsequent renewal. So we will just liaise with those affected and make a decision on a case-by-case basis. But if they do request a refund, then the refund would be given. But obviously it would probably be easier all round if we were to issue credits that would be utilised. But obviously we have to be mindful that some who hold licences who would be affected by this decision may not be choosing to renew and would therefore need the refund.
I appreciate that. Well, putting my business head on, we've heard other members mention risks to the council, and as you say, over a very short period of time, we've rapidly increased the number of staff from 4 to 11, purely as a result of a large influx of applications. And should that go elsewhere, we could have a similar movement in staff levels from 11 to 4, which, unless those are redeployed, might require, God forbid, redundancy. Now, in fact, actually, Councillor Goldsack would probably understand this model as well as hopefully I do, but from the computer world where I used to work, manufacturers of PCs used to sit down before the start of the financial year with their resellers and say, okay, how many are you going to buy? And they would make a commitment, and that obviously then drove the back-end manufacturing machine so that they made that number, and there was a commitment on their part that they would deliver to that reseller 10,000 PCs. And then it's on the reseller to resell them. And but if they didn't take 10,000, obviously the manufacturer's left with a huge stock. And so what they do is that they come to an agreement with the reseller that if they hit their target, what they do is they get a credit, which they can obviously use in the following year. So that is both fair and it engenders people meeting their commitments, and obviously they get their money back, yeah, in a reasonably short space of time. So realistically, nobody loses out. I wonder whether we have or even might consider that sort of model where it engenders the loyalty of the large operators who either have come or may wish to come to us, such that the licensing fees, if adjusted because of the large influx, could result in a credit back to them at the end of the financial year, which would then use the next year. And that way, as long as they met their commitment, then they would not be out of pocket. But equally, we wouldn't have the risk of having to reduce the number of staff drastically if they walked away within 24 hours.
Yeah, and I completely understand that, and I understand the example that you gave there in that particular market. With licensing, we can't enter into those sort of contracts with license holders. Effectively, we have set parameters of what we can charge, what we can't charge, and effectively what we do is we give, and we did give an indicative figure to them that if they were to provide X amount of licenses to us, then we would run this review system that we're doing here now today, and that the indicative figure of what that economies of scale would be brought in is what I've put into this table. Now, obviously, what will happen is they will now continue to license with us, hopefully, as all of our other operators will continue to license with us. And in a year's time, that indicative figure, which will be the one set today, may be reduced further. Now, if they don't bring as many licenses to us in this next period, then obviously, we won't have to put more staff in, but that might impact on the on those sort of costs which we would incur, whether it's redundancy payments or other costs, and they would be put into this report, and that indicative fee, which I say would be set today, would be revised back up because it's no longer covering the costs, or, as I say, if they continue to migrate and renew like they are giving indication of their intent to do, then we could find that these figures that that members may determine today will be further reduced. So they're the parameters that we have to work in. They're not ideal in that we are on a sort of degree of faith, but so far, as I say, in the 3 years that we've been working with this company, everything they said they're going to do, they've done. They've committed. We have ongoing meetings with their head of recruitment and their head of vehicle fleet to see how many are likely to be migrating over in the next few months, etc., etc. So we can obviously ensure that we've got the right number of people, and that's why we grew by putting in we put in a handful of administrative staff initially. We then put some more staff in. So I think the first batch were in for the 1st of April. The second was in July, I believe it was beginning of July, and then we've just had another, so the 5th admin person just started in September, and only now, after what has been sort of 8 months of this project and sort of 6-7 months of it actually being live, have we actually recruited the senior position, which is obviously a more expensive position to recruit as well, because it's justifiable now, and it really wasn't justifiable back in April, May. So we continue to monitor it, but we can't do anything more than we're currently doing, and there is going to be a risk to this authority, but it's a managed and calculated risk, and these fees will always reflect the cost recovery level of the work which is entering and the time it's taken us to get it out. Okay.
Councillor Trapp, did you find your question?
I did find my question, and I'm moving away from taxes. Sorry. I'm not taking a taxi. Table 1 as well says that there's sort of irrecoverable debt of about 82,000 or 70, somewhere around that. Are there any particular? I noticed also that the license fees that you are proposing for next year are exactly the same, as there's no increase. are there any particular areas where the license fee doesn't reflect the work that is involved in the... Do you see what I mean? So should we be increasing some of the license fees where they actually will make a loss, if you see what I mean?
No, absolutely, Councillor. So, as I say, when you've had a static department for a number of years, you can look at it and you can sit down with finance and you can say, yep, about 12% of our time is going to be dealt with animal licensing of some description. And therefore, you know, if you've got a relatively static expenditure level, you can work out 12% of 380,000. That's what you've got to try and recover. And they have all largely been recovering. You know, we put the animal fees up very marginally, I think 2 years ago, and they are recovering their costs. Now, as I've sort of highlighted in the report, the reason why I'm sort of recommending leaving all of the discretionary fees at the levels that they are at this review point, other than the taxi ones, is because the impact of the taxi side is having that knock-on impact on all of the percentages and all of where our time is being spent, because we have had to curtail some of the activities that we would have normally been doing in the other areas of licensing in order to obviously ensure that we've got everybody trained up and all those sorts of things. So it's not, putting it bluntly, it's not been a textbook year for how, you know, we would normally be spending our time. We've had to be pulled into different areas that wouldn't be. And I feel that if we were to amend any of those discretionary fees when the early indications after 6 months of this period are showing that they are largely recovering their costs, would be an unfair thing to do. I feel we need to leave them where they are. They're certainly not making money. You know, they're not sitting at large surpluses. And by leaving them where they are, it will provide a degree of certainty to those areas of trade that rely on our licences in those areas, and can be adjusted if needs be next year at the next renewal point.
Councillor Denny.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stuart, for your lovely presentation. I've got 2.5 questions, if that's all right. Because Councillor Horgan kindly sort of asked part of my question. So if I go back to what Councillor Horgan was saying about the refunds, how much are the backdated refunds? Have we actually got a figure at the moment?
No, I don't know what the official figure is. It is likely to be in the region of around, probably around sort of 50,000 in refunds or credits. I would imagine it will only if it won't. All of the migrating drivers who have been on this restricted license, we have obviously. No, it's not obvious at all, is it, to members? But I just think it's obvious to me because I do this all day, every day. No, the existing trade largely pay per transaction. So when they apply for a vehicle, they'll pay by credit card, debit cards, you know, and that's how they work. Now, obviously, if you're putting in 400 drivers and 400 vehicles, you know, we don't do it that way for them. They have been providing us with an amount into a holding account on a as needed basis, so that as we receive the applications, we allocate a payment to those records, and then obviously journal the money that's sitting in a holding account until it's depleted. And just before it's depleted, because we always have to have the money before we issue, we get in touch with this company's accounts department, who then furnish us with another significant sum into the holding account, which we then deplete. So those will not be needing any kind of refund or anything else like that. The only ones that will be affected by this are those people who have applied for driver licenses and vehicle licenses from the 1st of April, and we're probably talking around about maybe 90 individuals will need some sort of reimbursement. Now, those individuals may have applied for a couple of vehicles. Certainly, the larger operators in our area would have licensed, obviously, a handful more vehicles, but it's still probably around 90 individuals that we'll be dealing with to remedy the situation, if indeed those charges are retrospectively done as I've recommended.
Thank you, Stuart. You talked about significant surpluses. I suppose it's a bit like using the word reasonable, isn't it? We often use what is reasonable, but reasonable to somebody is not necessarily reasonable to another person. So what is a reasonable, if you like, significant surplus?
Generally speaking, it's kind of widely held that if you're making more than 15% year on year as a surplus, then something should be done to look at those fees. So, as I pointed out, sort of, earlier in the report item, if all licensing ebbs and flows over a period of time, as I say, we have various things come up for renewal at different times. Therefore, we'll spend more time on certain areas than we do in a previous year, and it is very possible that that you could have a 15% deficit, you could have a 15% surplus, but you wouldn't necessarily review the figures up or down on that one isolated year. But more than that, then you start looking at it and thinking, should we be making an adjustment at this point in time? Well, this level of surplus which is projected, is more like 40%, and it will get worse, and it will be challengeable. And my position here at the authority is obviously to ensure that we don't leave ourselves in that position, and that's why I'm putting the recommendation to members today that as it does seem a bit surreal that we're sat here in a fees meeting saying we should be putting these fees down, because obviously, generally speaking, it's always an upward trend because of inflationary factors and all the other things that we deal with. But that's where we are, and this was always on the cards, and it was discussed back at the beginning of the project, and it has now come to fruition. And so the published fees, need to be reflective of what we're doing, and currently that surplus is too great. Thank you.
Lastly, can you just remind me, because I've sort of forgotten, the migration project, is it a long... What is the agreement with that? How long is it lasting for? Because I can't quite remember.
Yeah, there's no agreement. It's a project because I felt that was the best way of kind of getting your head around it. Arguably, what it is it's a national operator who has decided to move their fleet to us. It is open-ended. It doesn't have any terms or restrictions or conditions other than those which are in our policy. It is open and available to anyone, so any operator out there can apply for the restricted private hire vehicles and driver licenses if they meet the criteria. So in that way, it isn't a specific thing that's been negotiated with this one client. We don't have those arrangements. We are the administrators and enforcers of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976 and the Town Police Clauses Act 1847, believe it or not. And under that, we have to treat everybody exactly the same. So there is no end date on the agreements. If this company grew to 7,000 vehicles and drivers, then we would have 7,000 licensed with us, whilst we remain East Cambridgeshire District Council. If they lost a lot of contracts and it constricted to 3,500 drivers and vehicles, then obviously, we would see that constriction. But what we do, again, from a costings and sort of business point of view, because although we're a local government, we're public authority, etc., we run licensing effectively like a business. And so, we don't go out and stretch and get additional resource in and additional people in until we need it. So what we do is we go into a stress situation where perhaps our turnaround times drop from a few days to 7 or 8 days, and then we see, and obviously can see from that we've got a resource deficit, and then we recruit into that position, to obviously bring things back, because you know, we don't want people sat around twiddling their thumbs, costing money, not doing anything, because that's not good for them, it's not good for the council, and it's not good, obviously, for our taxi trade or any of our other trade. So that's why, you know, we do things the way we do.
Thank you, Stuart. Any further questions for Stuart? Oh, Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Talking about staffing, there's been a lot in the media about organisations wanting their people to come back into the office rather than people like working at home, don't they? But I do think it has perhaps an impact. I mean, every time you ring up a customer service, no one always seems to be able to quite get that, you know, immediate information that they need, because they are not sitting in an office, you know, sort of 20 feet away from someone who knows the answer. Are you having a lot of your, especially new people, asking to work from home, and does that have an impact?
Yeah, so every one of my new staff members, once they get through the 6-month probation, they have a right under the council policy to work hybrid, which is a split of 3 days in the office, 2 days from home. They are all utilising that. They've all found a benefit in it. And because of the way our systems are, everything we deal with is online. It's all computerised. Nobody needs to come into this office for these restricted licences, you know, at all. It's all done via couriers and secure post, etc. Even in our existing trade, who will come in, they only come in probably once a year to pick up, you know, to pick up things that historically they would be needing to come in 5-6 times a year to deal with us. So, has it had any impact at all? No. It honestly, it hasn't. You know, there's an argument of saying actually that for certain role levels, it's more efficient to be remote. You know, morale, motivation, you know, respect, all of those things are obviously earned by having that trust in people. And as I say, they're doing a fantastic job. And there's been absolutely no difference in the first few months to the last month when they've all been able to work remotely. The processing times are still as high as they ever were.
Thank you, that's very reassuring.
Thank you, Stuart. Do we have any further questions for Stuart? Must be exhausted. Any further questions for Councillor Denny? Go on.
Sorry, Chair, please don't have a go. I might be a bit pernickety. I might be stupid, actually, to be honest. It's probably that one. Page 16... Table 3, private hire vehicle licence, yes. Saving naught. Let's see. And
this was pointed out, it shouldn't have 6 foot. So it's going to go down from 250 to 160.
and then the Hackney one underneath.
Now, have we got any more questions for Stuart? Do we feel we need to move to debate, or are we quite happy to move to a vote on the 3 items that we need to consider? Does anybody have anything they want to say about this? We're quite happy to move to the vote. Right, I'll take them at one at a time. I'm happy to propose from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Horgan to second. We'll take 2.1 in its entirety. All those in favour? 2.2 in its entirety. All those in favour? Councillor Day, are we thinking?
That's the fees that we agreed last time, wasn't it?
No, we're coming. That's the next paper.
Oh.
This is all to do with this agenda item. As unanimous. And 2.3 in its entirety. Thank you. Brilliant. In which case then we will move on to agenda item number 6, which is the Hackney carriage fares. That's the one we discussed last time. Lee. Over to you, Stuart. More water.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this item is to consider comments submitted in response to the Taxi Table of Fares Amendment Notice, which was published on the Thursday, the 18th of September 2025. So background to this was on Wednesday, the 10th of September 2025, members considered a detailed report from officers which outlined the reasons why a change to the existing tariff of fares could be justified. Having considered this report, members authorised officers to publish a notice of a proposed tariff of fares in accordance with the controlling legislation and notify all existing Hackney carriage proprietors. Public notice was placed in the Ely Standard Paper edition and in the online edition. As well as being placed in the council offices and Ely Library, which outline the proposals contained in Table 1 below. So as I say, Table 1 is what went out to consultation. During the consultation period, a total of 14 comments were received from members of the licensed trade. They're contained in Appendix 1. No other comments were received, and the comments were split as contained in paragraph 3.2. 7 in support, including 1 representing a large taxi firm licensed with the council, represents approximately 30% of the Hackney carriage fleet that works in the district. 3 objecting to the proposal but agreeing that an increase of some description is justified, and 4 outright objecting to any increase at this point in time. Now, Table 2 below provides a summary of the main points raised in the comments received, officer comments on the points raised for member consideration. Hackney carriage drivers are at liberty to charge fares lower than the specified table of fares. Just so members are aware, these are a table of maximum fares that a proprietor may charge. So as I say, Table 2 just sets out some of those main points that members obviously had a chance to read through already. So the conclusion is the consultation has shown that the trade is split on the proposal. Comments submitted suggest approximately 48% or 44 of the 91 Hackney proprietors had their opinion represented, and 84% or 37 of those 44 support the proposal. The comments not supporting the proposal raise concerns of competition from online platforms such as Uber and the cost of living impact, should I say, resulting in fewer fares being taken if the fares were to be increased. Now, members must consider the full details of the comments received in Appendix 1 against the reasoning behind the proposal submitted in the first committee papers and determine whether those comments opposing the increase provide sufficient evidence to override the proposals as set out in the formal public notice. If members are satisfied that they do, then the proposal should not be carried and an alternative should be considered, which could include remaining with the current table of fares. However, if members are satisfied that the comments in support of the proposal outweigh those opposing, then the proposal should be carried to come into effect before the relevant date of Friday the 3rd of December. That's a legislative requirement, but it comes into effect before that relevant date. To assist members, officers have created 2 further tariffs below, Table 2 and 3, which would result in approximate increases of 10 and 15% across the board. In order to achieve this, the flag rate or initial hire rate has had to be reduced from 960, which was what was published in the notice for consultation, to 880 yards. But they are just alternatives for members' consideration. Financial implications on this item. If members were to approve a proposal, or one of the alternative tariffs shown, then Hackney proprietors would see estimated increases in turnover, and it's important to say it's turnover, not profit, of between 10 and 20% if they applied the maximum levels of fares permitted. And members of the public would see the same level of increases in journey costs that they will incur if obviously the trade were to levy the maximums that they're permitted to and not reduce them, which they're also permitted to do. Officer time, again, has been required to run this entire consultation process and to obviously be here today, but that's coming out of the fees, which is what we've just discussed in the previous item. Legal implications, there are legal implications on this. If we don't set the level of fares and the date they commence, which has to be by Friday the 3rd of December 2025, if we fail to do that, our table of fares will be unlawful and cannot be enforced. And there are authorities out there, I believe 1 or 2, that don't actually have a table of fares set for their hackneys, but they are very much in the minority. That's the end of my report, Chair. Again, I'm here for questions.
Thank you. Stuart. Questions for Stuart? Okay, Councillor Inskip.
Yes, I was a little confused about the numbers in paragraph 4.1 compared to the comments that you received.
Bless you.
So if I look at the comments received, you've had a total of 14. 7 in support, 3 objecting to that increase but seeing there's a need for some increase, and 4 objecting outright. But here you're quoting 44 out of 91 and 37 out of 44.
Yeah, Councillor, apologies again if this is not clear enough in the report. But the reason for that is because one of the people who submitted the comment is a gentleman sat at the back who represents a large number of Hackney proprietors and Hackney vehicles. And so I didn't count his voice as one. I counted his voice as being those who are employed as Hackney proprietors for the vehicles which this gentleman runs.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions, Councillor Trapp and then Councillor Colbert. I'm sorry if you were waving first, Christine. I didn't see. I just saw Councillor. Ladies first.
Well, it's only a quickie. 880 yards, I can understand. It's half a mile. Why 960? Where does that come from? Please.
That's a little bit more than half a mile.
Yeah, it's just because of the way that the meters will work in order to get what they call the click rate. So it's a rate that is charged, and you can set it at any level from 10 yards or 1 yard through to 1760, whatever, for the full mile. But what it enables also then to do is the click rate. So once that initial rate has gone, it will click up at 10 units or 11 units or 9 units. So you have to set and adjust that first rate because of the way the meters work, which is, yeah, so that's the reason why it's set like that.
I do get that. It's just that I can't understand what on earth 960 represents. Yeah. That's all. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm just bemused.
Yeah.
Councillor Trapp.
Thank you. Don't be so weary about letting me on. Actually, it's 6/11 of a mile, if you'd really like to know, Christine. Okay.
He's had his shoes and socks off in addition to his badge.
What surprised me, I'm concerned about is the number of comments, pages 45, 49, 53, about Ubers. Ubers actually on the station forecourt. And I thought they had to be pre-booked and not be able to be flagged down. So it seems from 1 or 2 of the comments that they actually, when all the Hackney carriages leave, they move in and pretend to be a Hackney carriage. And I think that's something that we should be looking into, or not.
No, you're absolutely right. It is something that I'm going to be tasking. We have been out once or twice. Every time we've gone out, there is nothing lawfully stopping an Uber from being in that parking area. They can't sit on the rank, but the rank is not. It's not a rank that's actually enforced by the council. It's owned by the train company, and the Hackneys who sit on that rank actually have to have a permit from the train company to use it, as opposed to the ranks which are on our high street and marketplace, which we obviously enforce and deal with. So the point of an Uber vehicle or any private hire vehicle sat up at the station in itself is not unlawful. They will be on the platform, they will receive a booking through that platform, and then they will wait until that person arrives at the station and collect that person. There is absolutely nothing we can do about that. It's a problem across the country. The only thing we can do is if they are there and they haven't got somebody through the app, and we obviously witness that happening, then that would be unlawful plying for hire, which obviously we would deal with. Or if they were sat, say, in one of the parking bays and they were standing there going, taxi, taxi, this sort of thing, soliciting, then we can also prosecute them for that. But if they are sat in their vehicle and nothing more than that, there is nothing we can do about that particular behaviour, although we do understand that it is very antagonising to our existing trade who run their business from the station.
I mean, one gathers from those letters, from the comments, that they are touting for business, the Ubers.
Yeah, but the evidence doesn't support that.
Okay.
You know, so again, I'm not going to sit here and say that there may not be occasions where some of them have acted unlawfully, but the evidence that we've had, you know, hasn't suggested that. It has suggested that they have been there waiting for a booking to come in, and then the person comes out of the station and they'll see it on their app, and they'll see the registration number and they'll walk over to where the driver sat. And again, that is not unlawful. It's never been unlawful. It's just Uber have cornered the market, obviously, and become this gargantuan, you know, online presence. But there are obviously other platforms out there that do a similar thing.
And I think I support Councillor Colbert with instead of 611s, it might be just better to do half mile, because I noticed one of the comments also said, how can I calculate? You know, it's a more difficult calculation. Yeah. And actually, if that's table 2, isn't it? And if actually the first 800 each was reduced to £4, it would be the same then after forevermore. It will catch up with itself.
It's all to do with how the meters work on the click rate. You know, and if we do it differently, it doesn't always work. And there's a lot of calculations that kind of went in to try and make these figures work to get to what was obviously published, because that is an alternative if members feel the weight of objection is sufficient to overturn the rates which were published. Obviously, the rates that were published would be the 960 yards, but effectively, one of those comments you say about the lady who said that she would find it difficult to know. Well, we will provide all of the trade with a little laminated sheet of exactly what it will mean on the mileage rate. But in reality, the vast majority of journeys will be at least a mile. So, you know, so it will be irrelevant. There may be a very small number of journeys that would benefit by having a lower flag rate.
There's also a couple of comments about the impact of the 20-mile-an-hour limit and waiting times.
Yeah, again, as Chair's just alluded to, you know, the speed limits across the land are not something that we can take into account. And again, you know, a lot of this is individual sort of supposition as to whether it is or isn't. And you know, you'll have one corner of a room will say it's a really, you know, sort of bad thing, and then on the other side it will be, well, actually, as long as they're still moving, doesn't matter if they're just moving at 3 or 4 miles an hour, it will still be on the distance, not the time. But obviously, if they are sat stationary, then it will go on to the time, and waiting time will come into it as well. So it is based on distance and time. So obviously, if a taxi driver was sat with a booking and not moving, like you get in London a lot, then they would still increase, the tariff would still increase, even though they're not actually moving. But generally in this district, you know, it's pretty unusual for a hackney to go on to waiting time. Most of the time when they're engaged in a journey, they will be moving at a speed sufficient to make it click into distance.
Thank you.
Councillor Goldstaff.
Thank you, Stuart. Again, really good paper. I like the process. The process is that we came up with some ideas and we run them by the users of the process, and they had the opportunity to come back to us. But we've also put up a couple of other ideas in tables 2 and 3. I'm assuming that the users of the taxi drivers haven't seen those. So no. I'm a bit confused as to the process at the start looks absolutely fair and equitable, where we listen to what the taxi drivers say on an idea, and we judge accordingly. Yeah. Then we've got a couple of other ideas that we haven't showed them. Just something about that doesn't feel right, unless I'm missing something.
I don't disagree. The reason why they were put in there was just because obviously this process is is quite a lengthy one. It's quite a complex one to go through with all the different legal notices and everything else that we have to do. And if members today ultimately decided that they're not going to go with the published rate, then arguably you would be looking at sort of starting again if I hadn't given potential other options. Now, they are not there to say you have to use them. They are not beyond what was published to everybody. They, you know, the majority of, if you look at it, the information that has come back from the consultation is that the vast majority of people are saying there should be some increase, and they're either agreeing that the increase should be 20% or there should be some increase. And what these two tables were saying was, well, if members feel that the weight of evidence suggests that there could be cause to increase it, but you weren't quite happy to increase it to a 20%, then you could be minded to increase it to 10 or 15% if you felt that the evidence supported that. Now, I don't feel that there would be anything unlawful in accepting one of those lower tables, because it's not greater than what was consulted on. And it is reflective of what the comments were saying. But it is something, I do get your point, it is something that members need to bear in mind. And ultimately, if members did feel that it was not right to go for one of those, but the evidence was such that they couldn't go for the proposed, then you must instruct me to go back out to consultation again, and this will delay things by at least another 28 days.
Thank you for explaining it. The bit I still find I'm missing is why didn't we go to consultation with the three options?
Because we go to consultation on the agreement that was made at the first hearing. So the first hearing, it was agreed that there was sufficient evidence and parameters at play to go and allow the 20% rate, and that's how the process is. So members sat at this committee, having heard a very detailed report about all the different costs associated with operators, such as this gentleman sat at the back. And there was a proposal in that, and at that point, members could have said, we don't agree that the evidence is strong enough to suggest a 20% increase. We feel that you should go out to notice on this lower level. So I went out to consultation based on the information that was agreed by members at the previous hearing. And then this one today is to hear those consultee comments which have come back in and say whether there is sufficient weight to overturn and curtail what was put in that notice. And all I was intending to do by putting table 2 and 3 in this report was to effectively give members an indication of what the table would look like if you went for a lower level, rather than starting the whole process again.
But just to be clear, if, for example, members today decide that we're going to adopt table 2, could be 3, but table 2, then there will be another period of consultation that would have to undergo based on that.
No, there wouldn't be another. Now they could be challenged. They could be challenged by those who have objected by way of a judicial review or via a local government ombudsman. They could challenge it in that way. But in fairness, they could challenge that if we agreed with the proposed tariff as well, if they felt that due administrative process hadn't been followed. Now, there is nothing lawfully saying that we can't, we can't sort of amend having taken into account the consultation evidence. That's the reason for the consultation process in the first place. It's the same with any consultation exercise we run, where we send out a draft taxi and private hire licensing policy. We then get consultation responses, and then members will determine what those, whether those comments are sufficiently weighted to change the content of that draft document. Now, this particular part with taxi fares requires us to publish a notice of what our intended fare increase is going to be, which is what we've done, and then we have to take into account the consultation responses and arrive at a decision, and that decision will then be carried and put in by the relevant date, which is the 3rd of December. So I don't provide a recommendation formally other than what I've stipulated, which is, you know, we have more support for the 20% than we have for any of the other options. And in that regard, you as members have to give weight to, you know, to that evidence, and only, and this is an important thing, only if you feel that that weight is not sufficient, should you not go with the proposed published rates which were sent out to consultation. So they're the options, and as I say, the other option is if members are really not happy and feel that it's so balanced that that you feel to go with the published tariff would be wrong, and to go with one of these alternatives without it being consulted on with the trade formally is also wrong, then the only decision you can come to today is to instruct me to go back out to consultation with one of the alternatives that you've agreed. But you would be, by doing so, going against the tariff that you recommended going out to publication in the first place. So it's quite a complex position, but that's where you need to be.
One come back on that. Just to understand, in 3.2, what we're saying is the 7 that are in support include a single entity that is 30% of our taxi holders, right? But then there are 7 that weren't in support. 3 that, whilst agreeing to a proposal, didn't want it, and 4 that outright didn't want it. So really I'll say what I'm thinking. The balance of power here is in the new incumbent taxi company that we've taken on over the guys that have been here forever.
Sorry, Councillor, no, I need to sort of stop on that. This is nothing to do with that company coming in, is nothing to do with this. This is Hackney Carriage trade only, the white-plated vehicles. They are only issued to operators, well, not even operators, should I say, they're only issued to people who apply for a Hackney Carriage driver badge, Hackney Carriage vehicle badge, and they are the vehicles that comply for hire in our district, and they can sit on the ranks in our district. So there is, if you were to talk about a balance of power, then, as I say, one of those individuals who responded, and they are in this room, represents our, I believe, 3rd largest operator, and they predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly work with Hackney vehicles. And as I say, we now have a Hackney fleet of around 91, it fluctuates, vehicles, and as I say, this gentleman represents 30% of those, approximately. Yeah.
I'm completely lost now. Do you want to go next? Councillor Horgan. So, I know, don't worry, got you. Don't panic. Down here.
Thank you.
Keith, and then you.
It's very quick. I'm sure the answer will be equally as quick. I'm sure it was in the report read in the 18th of September, but can you just remind us when the taxi fares were last increased?
Yeah, again, sorry, Councillor, just conferring with the Chair, I believe it was 2022. It was 3 years since they were last increased, because that was the reason behind the approximate 20% increase across the tariffs, was due to the fact that all the various markers suggested a 7% increase in costs in real terms per year since they had last been increased, which is, as I say, why the figure was set at 20%.
Councillor Trapp, and then Councillor Inskip.
Councillor Horgan stole my question. So basically, it is for the next 3 years we're setting these.
We do it every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
Yeah, historically, they were only set or were only reviewed when a member of the public or a member of the trade approached the licensing authority and asked for the process to be done. Now, in 2022, The panel at that point in time made a resolution that they would be reviewed automatically every 2 years. Now, unfortunately, and apologies were made to the trade, that due to this project we've already been talking about today and all the other issues which were going on, this particular piece of work was delayed, the start of it was delayed by about 6 months, which is why we're now sort of here as opposed to being here back in February.
Another question, I wasn't quite sure. If we, say, took on table 2, we would not need to go out to consultation, is that right?
My opinion here is that we wouldn't need to go out to consultation because it would be a direct adjustment to the table that's been published as a result of taking into account the evidence which has been heard and presented in written form for today. As I say, that's for members to determine whether they're comfortable with doing that. But as I say, it should only really be considered if members believe that the evidence does essentially outweigh the support for changing with the published rates that were agreed to go out to consultation in the first place.
All done, John? Councillor Inskip. Oh,
The question really was about perception, that even though you say that the individual Hackney carriages need not charge the full amount will be displayed on most other carriages, so that even if one knows there's a cut rate one, it will still be, oh, all Hackney carriages have gone up by 20% or whatever it is. Do you see what I mean? That it actually will affect the majority. The majority will affect even the minority.
Yeah, absolutely. If you know, every one of our Hackney carriage vehicles has to display the tariff of fares. They have to have it, you know, there. Obviously, word will get around that taxis are suddenly more expensive than they used to be. But as I say, you know, it was detailed in the previous report where even if the published rates are, you know, are to be agreed and put into force, you know, from today's meeting, it still only puts us mid-table compared to all of our neighbouring authorities. So, you know, I think everybody appreciates in the world that things are getting more expensive, and as detailed in the previous report, you know, those costs are being incurred, and there is a balancing act. There is a risk that putting up fees, or putting up fares, should I say, will have an impact on the number of journeys and the number of miles that a Hackney proprietor will cover. But that was a risk known to the trade when they requested the review. And it's been requested, and we've gone through all the figures, and the figures suggest that, you know, an increase can be justified. It's been 3 years since one was, and, you know, the figures were showing that drivers, you know, if nothing changes, drivers are roughly £10,000 to £11,000 out of, you know, poorer now than they were 3 years ago. You know, and we've just talked obviously on our previous item that, you know, fees are going down, and yes, you know, that will have an impact. You know, people are going to be happy, I'm sure, about that. But if you put into context or perspective, you know, that the cost of a new vehicle to get out there, a hybrid vehicle or a Euro 6 vehicle, has probably, you know, 60% increase in cost. You know, there's many thousands of pounds extra that has to be recovered over a sort of 5-10 year period, compared to perhaps, you know, £150, £200 of reduction in fees. So there are a lot of factors at play that you know, members need to take into account, but they are, the 20% in itself is justifiable on the evidence which was presented to members before. Again, I keep hammering home this point, but it really is whether the weight of the objections is sufficient to overturn that. That's the crux of it.
Councillor Inskip hand was up first, Christine, and then we can go to you.
Yeah,
Councillor Inskip.
I'm probably just going to get Stuart to repeat what he's said previously, but trying to be helpful on the process. So going back to the original process, when we sent something out for consultation, the process only allows us to send out one, let's say, schedule of fees. We can't say, here's option A, B and C and choose between them.
Absolutely, which is why, you know, there are some authorities out there who don't take that initial report to a committee. They either have a portfolio holder or their licensing manager will determine it. It goes out to publication, and then members just hear all the comments if there are any. Now, obviously, we don't do it like that. We engage with our members, and obviously that panel back in September heard a lot of information, debated at length, and agreed at that point that the table that was published should be published and not a lesser level at that point. And so now we're now on this next stage, and we just have to see it through. But you know, we can't put 2 or 3 tables out.
Maybe this, and then my next question probably is maybe not a so precise one, but effectively what you're doing by also showing those other options is giving us a range of responses to that consultation. If you just said, here, this is what we send out for consultation, now you need to approve it, effectively it makes a little bit of a mockery of the consultation process because we haven't considered other options. Yeah.
It was a difficult thing, and we again, in open and transparency, we were like, well, should we provide members with these 2 alternatives? And you know, we on balance felt that yes, we should, because obviously we've come a long way through a process. Obviously, you know, a good chunk of the trade want to see an increase, and it's been requested some time ago. And obviously, you know, what you're looking at is, yes, we've sent this proposed tariff out. We've had a wealth of information which suggests that that was incorrect. I'm not saying we have, but I'm just playing this out. And that's what I've given you these other options, because if you agree that that evidence, actually, they are right, we probably have over-egged this, then you've got these options in a table that could potentially give you another alternative answer, you know, to appease as many people as possible in the process based on the evidence that you're hearing. But they shouldn't be used if you don't get over that first hurdle in the first place. If you do not believe that the evidence provided is sufficient enough to overturn the proposed tariff which went out to publication, then the proposed tariff that went out to publication is the one that should be put into force by the relevant date.
Thank you.
Christine Kolb.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I did actually think that I fully understood this until I flicked through the appendices, and noticed that in the letter from JR Taxis, it says we do think that the £8 start rate should stay, and I don't understand what that means, please.
Councillor, that's just referring back to the initial rate. We never had an £8 start rate.
No wonder I can't understand.
No,
Thank you.
we've never had that. I'm sure a gentleman at the back wish we had, but we have never had an £8 start rate. It's I believe it's just a misunderstanding from their point. You know, our start rate has never been as high as that.
Right, okay, I do understand these then, thank you very much.
Councillor Whelan, did you have your hand up, or was that just a mistake? You're scratching your head. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you. 3 years, almost 3 years or whatever, without altering the tariffs seems quite a long while. It is in our interest to have a stable taxi service operating that use good vehicles that are, you know, properly maintained, and everybody is hit by inflation and rising costs and everything, but I think that really we should give the taxi operators an opportunity to increase their fares.
Councillor Ambrose Smith, is that a question, or are you weighing it? Have you hurtled into debate? You've hurtled into debate.
I think it's almost
That's
a statement, shall we say.
Yes, it was a statement.
I perhaps jumped the gun.
You have kind of, but not to worry. We have Councillor Denny.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stuart. Just a quickie. When members of the trade wrote in and asked for this re-looking at the fees, did they actually suggest any particular percentage?
No, because with respect to the trade, it would have no bearing on matters. The report that was prepared back in September is an extensive report that looks at all factors, the various inflationary indexes. We look at costs of insurance, costs of maintenance, tyres, compliance testing, just general vehicle servicing costs, the cost to replace vehicles, have any accidents repaired. We look at all of these different parameters. And so even if the trade had come to us and said, oh, we want 10%, if we felt that actually the evidence that we have collated suggested it should be, that it should be more than that or less than that, then that is what would come before members. Members would then determine what goes out to consultation, and the trade, if they weren't happy with that, would obviously comment, as would members of the public. And as I say, nobody from the public has, and obviously a small amount of people have said from the trade that they don't want to see it. Others have said they feel like there should be something, but they're concerned that it could have an impact because of the impact of Uber, etc., etc. And then obviously you've got a number of the trade who have rebutted on some of those comments and obviously said, actually, we fully support this and think it's necessary. So you have that evidence. You've got to weigh up whether it overrides the original decision back in September.
Councillor Goldsack.
With your permission, Chair, I'm going to try and move this forward with a proposal and moving into debate following the baton passed over there. Thank you.
That was going to be my next
Thank you. I propose that we accept the recommendations as per Table 1 for two reasons. One, the majority of responses come back do appear to be in favour of those. And two, I'm really unsure of the validity of the process of not going out to consultation on other such prices. That really leaves me full of dread. So the one that we've got is the Table 1 that has been through due process and duly consulted on. And I think the majority is coming back to say that that would be accepted. So therefore, I propose that we accept Table 1.
Happy to accept your proposal. Councillor Whelan will second. I was going to completely agree with you. I always bear in mind the fact that this is a maximum. They don't have to charge this. But the majority of the trade are in favour of it. And they're the ones that are doing the day-to-day work. There'll be one or two that would never go. And I have to say, I've been doing this for 12, 13 years. We've never had a response to a consultation like this one before. So when I was told there were 14 responses, I was quite taken aback. But no, I'm quite happy to... Christine, you're proposing, Councillor Whelan is seconding. Does anybody else have anything they want to weigh in before we move to the vote? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I had no real questions on this, just one comment really, and Stuart's touched on it, is obviously the effect of Uber in terms of, we know, and there's nothing wrong with the public getting cheaper fares, that it's a competitive market out there, but I think that from reading the report and from what Stuart said, they're, as we probably would expect, they're pushing the boundaries as far as they could go, so it's obviously up to us to be vigilant and try to police that as well as we can. But as you referred to earlier on, Stuart, through you, Chair, that they can sit there and somebody, that they can literally, I mean, I would imagine if somebody hasn't pre-booked a taxi, when I use it, I normally book it from the train if I'm so one's waiting for us. But there's nothing to stop them literally standing at the entrance to the station, seeing an Uber there and literally booking it there and then. But that's the world we live in, I'm afraid.
Absolutely, Councillor. It is the world we live in. Hackney Trade, although Hackney Trade do not need a private hire operator to fulfil their work, there are specific platforms out there that cater for Hackney proprietors who want to be on an online sort of platform. So, yeah, it is the way. It's the way of the world. And just like we talked in the previous item about how we as an authority have to be efficient, good turnaround, good service, etc., like that. then the way that the Hackney trade will compete is by providing that good service, punctuality, being there, you know, being professional, etc. You know, and that's the only way that they'll survive the same as us.
Councillor Inskip.
Yeah, I do have some concerns about the level of the increase. I know it's 3 years since there's been any increase, but I'm minded of the point that this is a maximum, and clearly with competition from private hire and Uber, then you know the operators need to be cognizant of that. I did wish to say in terms of Councillor Sharp's statement, and I will declare I have used Uber, but not in the UK. I've only ever used it I've used it quite a few times in Japan and America, generally because I've got it's convenience. I've no idea who the local operator is, but certainly what I've seen locally, and I have a number of times booked online with a local operator because they provide those services well as now, because I know who the local operators are. So there is. I can see that the local private hire operators are responding, and personally I'd rather give them the business rather than Uber, but that's a personal choice.
I have to say my limited experience of using Uber hasn't necessarily always it's proved cheaper than using a local booked hire, so I'm quite happy. So does anybody have anything further they want to contribute towards the debate before we move to the vote? In which case then we are recommending that we move forward with the original proposals from the previous meeting, which is table 1. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Denny against.
So it's 10 in favour, 1 against.
Yes, and I'll take you up later. Right, thank you very much. We now move on to item 7, which is the update. Do you have any updates? Are you exhausted?
Can have a shot of something. Now, I think members will be pleased to know that, to be honest, most of the stuff that I would normally talk about, I've covered really in the 2 items we've gone through. You know, the service has changed profoundly. We continue to do a lot of work in all the different areas, you know, when things settle down a bit more, this particular oral report will be a bit fuller, and it will be, to be honest, it will probably be just in time for when we're doing like the year-end stuff as well. So please excuse me at this point for not keeping you here for ages while I tell you the good work we're doing, but we are doing good work.
We'll save that for another day.
Yeah.
Save that for another day. There is a big question mark over the December meeting, so you may have to put your Christmas jumper on ice. But if that is going to be cancelled, we will let you know nearer the time, in which case then the next meeting will be on the 21st of January. And now at, what time is it? At 6 minutes past 12, I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for coming.